I again welcome you all, and we are hoping that it will be a very interesting session, and we will learn from each other, and we will be able to also take some actions at the end of this webinar. Let me first introduce the Transforming Tourism Initiative. It is an open civil society platform to transform tourism to contribute to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. As we are all aware, that COVID-19 has accentuated and deepened the twin challenges faced by all of us. Firstly, the climate crisis, and secondly, growing social as well as economic inequality, which is often linked to exclusion within and in between countries. As Transforming Tourism initiative, we felt that this is also an unprecedented time when tourism can be transformed, and to promote tourism that is fair, future-oriented, and as well as responsible and accountable. In order to do so, and also to increase the visibility of the civil society perspective on current tourism development, we have actually organized a series of online seminars. We started from looking at community resilience and change in tourism. We looked at labor as well as decent work, job in tourism, looking at the precariousness of employment. We have issued a joint statement during the World Tourism Day. We had a seminar on climate change and also man-made disasters and tourism. And today we are here to have one more online webinar, where we are looking at child protection in a new tourism era, challenges and the ways forward post-COVID-19. The travel and tourism sector has been among the hardest hit, including a wide range of the global companies, medium as well as small enterprises, particularly the informal small businesses, unorganized sector, and the street vendors. This disruption has it devastating or for the Asian as well as for the Latin American regions, where countries are strongly dependent on the travel and tourism industry. At this particular context has posed to the implementation of all children rights by the COVID-19 pandemic, and these consequences are felt across regions all over the world. The crisis has been and is still affecting economies and disrupting businesses. As a consequence, making families and children more vulnerable than ever. This has posed various difficulties for the children to be in a safe spaces, which were considered to be safe spaces are actually becoming quite vulnerable. With this, I would now request our speaker, Gabriela Kühn, who is in charge of ECPAT International's program strategy on child protection in travel and tourism in 2017. ECPAT International is a global network of civil society organizations committed to ending all forms of child exploitation. Gabriela has over 12 years of working experience in the area of child protection and children's rights at global, regional, and national levels. She will be providing us as an overview on the global trends and challenges to child protection in the context of travel and tourism and COVID-19. Over to you, Gabriela. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Joyatri, for this introduction, and thank you, Auntie, and everybody from the organizers for inviting ECPAT International to this discussion. So ECPAT International, as already introduced by Joyatri, works on all forms of manifestations of sexual exploitation of children, including worse forms of child labor, sale and trafficking of children, exploitation online, and in the context of travel and tourism. And I wanted to discuss these issues today all together, because none of these contexts are isolated and they need to be looked at in their complexity. So I was asked to talk about trends, challenges, and the way forward. What are the trends that we need to discuss when talking about this topic? So first, online and offline sexual exploitation of children are closely interlinked. Offenders misuse technology by contacting and abusing children in their countries and abroad. And the sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism has not stopped with the closure of borders and travel restrictions during the pandemic. It's because the offenders are not only foreigners, they also come from the same country or region as victims. They may be also long-term residents, workers, or volunteers. And also because offenders are increasingly grooming children online, exploiting them through live streaming, child sexual abuse images, and are likely to travel abroad to contact offend the same victims when the restrictions ease. Second thing I wanted to mention is the concept of sustainability. It needs to reflect its holistic and all-encompassing nature, and that includes also social aspects. Because usually the discussion is about management, environmental and cultural issues mainly. And destinations can be truly sustainable only if they create protective environments for children. So it's critical that the governments and the private sector look beyond economic aspects during the recovery phase. And particularly, as Joyatri mentioned, in the countries that are strongly dependent on tourism income. And there is good news that there are already some examples of this holistic approach to the discourse of sustainability. For example, the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development initiated Tourism for Sustainable Development track, and it's a program that paves way for partner countries towards a more resilient and more sustainable tourism by addressing vulnerable groups and addressing also children. Also, another example is the World Travel and Tourism Council that is going to include the topic of child protection during a session dedicated to sustainability at their upcoming Global Summit in Mexico. And there are other already good examples. For example, Global Sustainable Tourism Council, GSTC, already included child protection performance indicator among its criteria. Or last year, as we have countries here from Asia, the first destination Mekong Summit discussed child protection as part of sustainable recovery strategies. Third element I wanted to mention is the impact of ongoing digital transformation of the travel and tourism industry on children. Because as new products are being developed, such as seamless travel solutions, sharing economy practice via tech platforms, there is less and less direct contact between travel and tourism staff and people using the infrastructure. And this poses additional challenges to spotting and reporting possible cases of sexual exploitation of children. And it also comes as the reminder that all human rights due diligence processes need to include a child rights perspective to assess and address all impacts that are changing, because transforming industry may have different impacts through their evolving practice, operations, and entire supply chains. And last trend I wanted to flag is the growing domestic tourism, community, local, rural, and experiential tourism that are all alternatives to mass tourism. And these include some forms of voluntourism and orphanage tourism. And such forms tend to create unregulated and direct access to children that puts them at risk also of sexual exploitation, besides having other negative impacts on children's rights. So let me flag some challenges in the view of the presented trends. So first of all, addressing socioeconomic impact of COVID on children is very urgent because offenders keep adapting their modus operandi and taking advantage of this increasing imbalances of power. And the responses need to come through complementary approaches that I list a few of them here. Well, we need to address gaps in legal and policy framework that need to be improved and enforced by governments because children keep falling victims to sexual exploitation through the existing gaps. And there are advances, but many challenges remain to ensure that national legislations are actually compliant with international standards. Preventive efforts need to be strengthened through the involvement of the private sector, based on understanding of particular vulnerabilities of children. And the industry needs to take responsibility through adoption of effective implementation of policies, strategies, and trainings. And they can actually help also to encourage governments to adopt necessary regulations. Importantly, also protective environments for children in communities have to be created through strengthened collaboration between key decision makers and across the countries, together with civil society organizations that can bring in voices and perspectives of children and survivors. And finally, access to child and gender-sensitive justice, protection, care, and recovery needs to be ensured for all children. So let me present a brief snapshot that reflects some of the discussed trends and challenges. So this reflects findings from a legal and policy analysis that was conducted by ECPAT International, based on 24 points legal checklist that guides governments on how to improve their national frameworks to better protect children from sexual exploitation in the context of travel and tourism and online. And here I selected some countries. You can see their flags here from 4 regions. That is Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Madagascar, Tanzania, Kenya, and Philippines, Vietnam, India, and Nepal. So I will spotlight just a few elements from this analysis. So we looked whether the countries have obligatory standards for travel and tourism industry to protect children. So in more than half of the countries that I'm just giving here as an example, such standards do not exist or exist partially, and that leaves gaps through which children are falling victims to exploitation. We looked at whether the countries ensure liability of the private sector for cases of sexual exploitation of children. And mostly they do not, or only partially, which undermines access to child and gender-sensitive justice, protection, care, and recovery. And then let me show you 2 other elements of this analysis. So, do countries criminalize grooming? Again, more than half of them do not have such provisions. And do they regulate use of volunteers in childcare centers and activities with direct child contact? Mostly it is not regulated. With this brief overview, let me summarize the way forward, like in very concise way. What is needed is responsible and sustainable travel and tourism with child protection in focus now and in the perspective of the recovery. Responsible in terms of concrete action that needs to be taken by governments and businesses that can be influenced also by conscious customers. And sustainable, so the actions translate in tourism making positive and meaningful change to children and the entire communities in the long term. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing from other speakers who will discuss some of these topics from the perspective of their countries and regions and more in depth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you very much. It's a very, very precise and very concrete overview that's actually sets the ball rolling for this evening, morning, day, based on wherever we are. At this point, we completely agree the kind of points that you have mentioned here, and we would also like to kind of reiterate that though the tourism and also the technology industries are not to be blamed for the sexual exploitation of children, it is, however, important to recognize the role that they can play in developing as well as implementing systems and mechanisms so that tourism facilities and services are not used by the traveling sex offenders to exploit children. I think it's a very important point to note that in this discussion, we're saying that everybody has a role, and Gabriela very nicely has pointed out the role of the multidisciplinary platform, multi-stakeholder platforms, which can actually take this child protection agenda ahead in tourism operations. With this, I now welcome Michelle Oliel. Please pardon me if I'm not pronouncing your name properly. It's a very Indian way of pronouncing it. Michelle is a human rights lawyer and children's rights advocate, as well as an executive director of Stahili Foundation. Robert Oliver is an international training consultant and advocacy and education director of Stahili Foundation. Stahili Foundation works in Kenya with local communities and government to support family and community-based alternatives to orphanages. It's a very important presentation that both of them will make together. It's on COVID-19 and the impact on children in residential care in Kenya and lessons for the tourism sector. Over to you, Robert and Michelle.
Great, thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Michelle Oliel, and we're really grateful for the opportunity to present to you. I'll be co-presenting with Rob, as was mentioned. Just to give a bit of context, Stahili Foundation was actually started in relation to a situation which involved foreign volunteers and resulted in the exploitation of children. This photo right here is actually, and I want everybody to keep this in mind, is in Kenya at an orphanage where foreign volunteers were brought and children were unfortunately recruited and exploited, so trafficked to the orphanage as a result. So today we're going to be speaking a little bit about that, but also a bit about COVID-19 and the impact on children in residential care, and as was mentioned, the lessons learned. If we can go to the next slide, please. Great. So of course, in Kenya, much as many countries around the world, COVID-19 has had a profound impact on children. Since time is not on our side, I'm going to focus particularly on children in residential care and that impact. So in March 2020, Kenya registered its first case of COVID-19. As part of the series of confinement and containment measures, the government issued a directive to contain. And as part of that, one of the directives was that all children in residential care institutions be released back to their families. As a result of this, data was collected by the government with partners who supported this process. And what was found that as of March 2020, there were over 45,000 children living in residential care institutions in Kenya. But as a result of the directive, as you can see on the slide, over 19,000 were released as a result of the directive, and more than 26,000 remained in care. What we saw actually quite interesting, and I'll use the example of where we work, in one of the counties where we work, all of the children who were released in that county, there were 580 children who were released across 15, who were living in 15 institutions at the time of the onset of COVID-19. Once it hit, 398 children were, 197 children were released from residential care, the majority of which went home to families. 98 went to biological parents, either one or both, and 90 actually went to kinship care, indicating what care reform experts and child protection experts have long been saying, that children in institutions overwhelmingly do have families. The remaining children went to foster care, another form of family-based care, but that was 1%, and 4 others to supported independent living. So it drew for us important lessons on what is the status of children in these institutions. As a result, institutions have noted that funds have dried up. You can imagine that foreign volunteers have become, I use the word important, but essential, let's say, or sort of critical source of funds for these institutions. And with travel and tourism being down as it is, this of course has dried up. Of course, we see very many heightened vulnerabilities in the communities. Multidimensional poverty has exposed children and families to increasing risk of separation. So you see here, I have a quote that was in the Daily Nation. So what CCIs also were no longer receiving volunteers, but it also sent children home. So I'm going to talk a little bit about orphanage volunteerism in Kenya. And why this is important also to what I've just mentioned, which Rob will address in the last slide. orphanage voluntourism, like in many countries, and I'm sure my colleagues on this Zoom today will probably share as well, is recognized as a driver. Unfortunately, in Kenya, we have very little data on the prevalence, but we do know that tourist sponsors and donors have created a pull factor for children into institutions, whether they are being exploited for the purpose of financial gain or simply being separated unnecessarily and inappropriately against their rights. What we did see, though, even though we have very little data, Stahili Foundation, also with government partners and also partners at the Changing the Way We Care Consortium, conducted a 5-county situational analysis. We were responsible for one in one county. And what we did find within those five out of 47 counties in Kenya was a high number of volunteers who are working in these institutions. Particularly, what was most striking is when you look at the data is that where volunteers were more prevalent were areas where tourism was more prevalent. So we saw, for example, on the coast, a high number of foreign volunteers working with children. In Moronga County, we also saw that. The first photos actually from where we work, and that, as I mentioned, was an institution which was trafficking children as a result, and using foreign volunteers who were really the drivers of separating all those children, had families. So what we're really seeing is all of those is along the coast. So in Moronga County, along the coast, and in places where tourists go. I mean, Kenya really boasts a very beautiful, robust landscape. And you can imagine that also this brings a lot of people into the country. And there's a big misconception that coming and supporting children in these institutions are helping, when we in fact know that the 80 years of research of harms, which I won't, of course, dwell on here, but we know that this is quite harmful for children. And I want to note in this regard that in 2017, the government of Kenya, starting in 2001 really, has started to make important changes to the way it cares for children. And while I won't take us through all of the wonderful things the government is putting in place to make these changes to ensure that children stay in families and that we reduce reliance on institutional care, a moratorium was placed on the establishment of new CCIs, so that's charitable children's institutions. It's a term used for orphanage or children's home, just residential care institution. And as you see here, what they found is that it was evident that some of the children's homes were involved in unscrupulous practices, which may include child trafficking. So this is quite the impetus for the initial moratorium, which I should mention to colleagues on the call, that this moratorium remains in place. And while we don't know the full prevalence and scope of the problem, we do know it exists. And we do know that the tourism industry, as Rob will discuss, has an important role to play. It's likely, since tourism is down, that orphanage tourism is also down. But this doesn't mean that this stops here. If we take our lessons learned from other countries in disasters that happened, for example, in Haiti, Nepal, and otherwise, what we saw was a rise in institutionalization. So I will turn it over to Rob. While there's a lot that many stakeholders can do, we'll focus a little bit here on the tourism sector. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Michelle. I know we haven't got much time, so I'll be as brief as I can, and all of these issues will come back in the questions later on. I think the key question we're all asking in our lives is what will happen after COVID? Will we go back to normal, and what kind of normal will it be? And for this topic, it's about, will there be a resurgence of orphanage volunteerism, which seems to have gone down radically over the last year? What will happen when travel and tourism opens up? And can we influence the tourism sector now to prevent any such resurgence from happening? Now, I think the answer here lies in some of the very important initiatives that were taking place before COVID. It's not necessarily about starting something new, but we need to reinforce the code. I know that Damian's going to talk about the code in a minute. And other international campaigns against orphanage tourism, like the Rethink Orphanages campaign. And there were 2 in the Netherlands aimed at young people that were very effective. So we need to reinforce and rejoin these campaigns. We also think that working with development and other actors to develop sustainable alternative forms of tourism is connected with this. It's not about stopping something, it's about stimulating alternatives that are more sustainable. We also strongly support the continuing education initiatives to raise awareness about this problem, particularly with the gap year providers, you know, the student travel providers. The American Gap Year Association has issued new guidelines to its members, also in the UK Federation, to try to get better standards of practice, shall we say, about managing volunteers abroad. But we also need to go further and make sure that child protection is part of policies and practices for tourism operators. And that's why we support the Transforming Tourism initiative very strongly, which is, of course, what this webinar is based on. Final point I'll make is about CSR, about social responsibility by companies. We worked for a number of years with KLM Wings of Support, and this is the kind of CSR arm of KLM. They used to support orphanages, including one in Kenya and in Central America. They shifted 2 years ago towards promoting family-based care projects. So it's this redirection of funding and support that we really need to encourage now. That is just one example of a CSR activity where we could be focusing our activities. But I think there's many more within the travel sector. Thank you very much. Sorry, I've gone on too long.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Michelle. We all know that there is new forms of travel that have been proliferated, such as we spoke about, tourism tied to voluntourism and peer-to-peer arrangements for accommodation. These have multiplied the opportunities and the venues available to the offenders, and thus the risk to children. So the question really is, as we restart tourism, is there a way out? Can we think of it differently? Are the tourism planners, policymakers, decision makers, and the practitioners are thinking tourism in a very different way? I now welcome Damian Brosnan, Program Manager, The Code, to actually respond to this presentation made by Rob and Michelle and talk about the various efforts that has been taken by The Code to look at this new phenomena of voluntourism.
Thank you, Joyatri. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. I really appreciated the input from Michelle and Rob, and the example of KLM is really heartening as a proactive and positive change that a tourism company has been able to make and has recognised the need to change. What we do with the code is to work with tourism companies around the world on child protection in tourism, and part of that is looking at voluntourism in conjunction with Rethink Orphanages and Better Care Network. We have only a small footprint, I would say, in terms of the overall size of orphanage tourism around the world, and we would like to increase that presence, both in educating companies about why practice shouldn't be encouraged or facilitated, and also reaching to customers and to either long-term volunteers or short-term ad hoc opportunistic volunteers who might go for a day trip to an orphanage because they think it's a nice thing to do, and to direct them to more sustainable and responsible alternatives to what maybe has been traditionally seen as a good thing to do. I think the decrease in tourism in the last 12-15 months has actually given a chance to reset in some ways, as I think Rob mentioned, and hopefully give a chance to reset in a good way. But it means that we need to avoid the risk of the explosion of tourism when it starts again, and people going to less central locations, going to more, as Gabriela talked about, more community-based or more local-based tourism, which may include visits to schools or residential care facilities, and people wanting to get back out and experience something other than mass tourism. And I think that's where we find a real challenge for us as the code. So currently we're reviewing our voluntourism policy to try and make sure it's fit for purpose, and it's going to be a useful tool for companies who are members of the code. The clear distinction in the voluntourism policy is basically no orphanage tourism. Children are not tourist attractions, and this is something that should never be condoned or endorsed. And so companies who are providing orphanage tourism are basically not welcome as members of the code. It's a very clear distinction that we make. But there's a lot more nuance than that as well, and there's a lot more education that we need to provide to companies, to provide to tourists, but also to work, as Joyatri mentioned, in partnership with governments, with NGOs, at looking at alternatives, at rehousing children or giving back to family-based care, and to also direct the good intentions of tourists to something that is less risky and less damaging for children. I'll leave it there. I know we're running short on time.
Thank you very much, Damian. I think it's a very important part of the discussion that you have brought in, that we do have instruments which the tourism industry should look at and can look at. Similarly, the organizations can also look at those codes, as well as the volunteerism policy, to see that how we can how we can really respond to this new phenomena. Without taking more time, because we're running out of time, I would now request Lady Mercedes Rivera Castillo from MAIS, ECPAT, Dominican Republic. They're also the code LCR, with local code representatives. She was born in Emberd, a small town in the province of Puerto Plata. In 2001, she has begun her participation as a volunteer in this organization, and after having received training at school by one of her educators, which she attracted a lot of attention and aroused her interest in being part of it. Her participation was part-time at that period, but now she is the technical assistant, the coordination assistant of this program. During all these years, she has received different trainings to expand knowledge in the work that she has been carrying out in favor of the protection of the rights of children and adolescents. Lady, may I now request you to...
Muchísimas gracias. Ya bien presentada. Nosotros estamos trabajando, desarrollando lo que es el programa de COP aquí en República Dominicana. Alguien mencionaba anteriormente que sabemos que el turismo o las habitaciones que se venden no son los responsables del manejo de esos turistas que vienen a nuestro país. Entonces nuestra presentación se dirige a la práctica del desarrollo que estamos haciendo a través de DECOP. Y nos dirigimos básicamente a lo que es el turismo formal e informal. El sector privado, nosotros nos enfocamos en dos vertientes, que es el sector formal. Este tiene un contacto, se podría decir, directo con la comunidad, puesto que una vez el turista o el viajero llega al destino, puede acceder a las comunidades alrededor del turismo que está disfrutando. El otro también es el sector informal, que es aquel que tiene un contacto mucho más directo con la comunidad, pues este se desarrolla en la comunidad. Entonces, el viajero turista tiene acceso a este turismo, tanto al formal como lo que es el turismo informal. Entonces, nosotros hemos llegado a unos supuestos, y es que el sector informal opera con una vinculación muy estrecha con el sector, que el sector informal opera con una vinculación muy estrecha con el sector formal, y ese sector informal, que son aquellos vendedores de playa, son aquellos que tienen un contacto muy directo con el viajero y con el turista, son aquellos también que montan las ferias en los hoteles, es decir, en esos hoteles grandes, en esos resorts. También tienen visitas programadas, servicios varios, como lo que es la venta se podría decir, de tour a monumentos que nosotros tenemos acá en República Dominicana. Entonces, otro de los supuestos es el fortalecimiento de una actividad en sus sectores, del sector informal o en la comunidad, para prevenir lo que es la explotación sexual comercial infantil en viajes y turismo. Entonces, nosotros lo que hemos tratado de hacer, colarlo en todas esas brechas que se pueda trabajar la prevención. Y qué mejor manera de tratar de introducirnos con aquellas personas que tienen un contacto directo con aquellos que vienen. Si bien es cierto, hemos trabajado, hemos llevado lo que es The Code a las empresas turísticas formal, haciendo acuerdos donde estas empresas capacitan y forman a sus colaboradores para que tengan una respuesta, es decir, se sensibiliza a ese colaborador de la empresa para que entienda que no solamente por tener un turismo sano y sostenible se debe respetar a un niño o niña adolescente, sino que entiendan que como seres humanos y como personas sujetas de derecho necesitan un respeto, necesitan de una protección. Entonces, ese trabajo se hace a través del sector formal. Pero el turista viajero no solo se queda disfrutando de un turismo formal, sino que sale y hace o disfruta también de lo que es un turismo informal. Entonces, el sector formal atrae indirectamente, el sujeto se podría decir explotador, pues es aquel que le ofrece todo lo que tenemos acá en el país, todos los monumentos, un turismo hermoso que promovemos y un turismo por el cual apostamos sano y sostenible, pero muchas veces ese viajero, ese turista no viene con la intención de solamente disfrutar de esa oferta que se le hace quizás a través de una agencia de tour operador, que es el turismo formal. Ese turista no viene con la visión de solamente estar dentro del hotel por el cual pagó su resort, sino que hace uso de lo que es un turismo informal. ¿Y con quién tiene ese contacto? Bueno, lo tiene cara a cara, diariamente y permanentemente con aquellos representantes del turismo informal. Entonces, nosotros hemos trabajado en la promoción de lo que es el código y hemos visto y llegamos a la conclusión que solamente tratando de concientizar a los operadores del turismo formal quizás no era suficiente para para promover la prevención de lo que es la explotación sexual comercial infantil en viajes y turismo, sino que también gracias a la colaboración y de lo que es el turismo formal y, bueno, se podría decir la disposición, logramos llegar a pequeñas asociaciones, como es el caso, voy a resaltar, para confortar las actividades del visitante explotador, puesto que muchas veces agarran la oferta que se le brinda y, bueno, pues ellos la transforman y la llevan a lo que quieren hacer. Entonces, se colocaron mensajes provocativos en t-shirt, en hogares, en lugares públicos, haciendo saber que en este país está penalizado lo que es el uso de niños, niñas y adolescentes en actividades sexuales. Tras la sensibilización logramos que pequeñas asociaciones se unieran a lo que es The Code, así asumiendo un compromiso de promover lo que es el respeto hacia los derechos de los niños, niñas y adolescentes. Lo que estamos haciendo, reitero, es resaltar, el caso de la asociación de vendedores como lo que es Asobe Pavapuma, que es una asociación que agrupa una gran cantidad de personas y esta es una asociación que cuenta con aproximadamente 2,000 miembros, los cuales tienen un contacto directo con el turista viajero y también está compuesta por pescadores, artesanos que venden en la playa, personas que elaboran estas trencitas que le encantan mucho a los turistas, esas personas que tienen un contacto directo. Muchas veces el explotador se asocia o quiere aliarse a esa persona para hacer la solicitud de un niño o una niña para tener actividades sexuales. Entonces, ya teniendo esta asociación comprometida y velando por el respeto de los derechos de los niños, niñas y adolescentes, para nosotros es de gran satisfacción que pequeñas artesanías como estas se unan y, como ustedes pueden ver en las imágenes que les muestra, realicen campaña para lo que es la prevención de la explotación sexual comercial en viajes y turismo. Así que se han elaborado afiches, stickers, donde el turista sepa que aquí se está trabajando en contra de lo que es la explotación sexual comercial. Gracias, perdón por excederme.
Thank you, Leidy. It's a very, very interesting discussion because you have pointed out the various action that was taken by the various groups of people and how that has resulted into addressing child protection in travel and tourism. I now request Anjay to please show two of our videos. Both are from India. One is talking about how a community tourism initiative has actually signed code during the COVID time, and why they have signed the code during that period. What was their commitment? And the second video, you will see that the Guide Association of a place called Khajuraho, which is in central India, Madhya Pradesh, have actually taken up addressing child protection as part of their operations, and how that is actually resulting into addressing child protection during this COVID period as well.
Hello everyone, Srijit here, CEO of Kabini Community Tourism and Services. Kabini is based in Kerala in South India. Kabini was formed as a research and campaign organization to address the negative impacts of mass tourism. We did quite a lot of research and campaigns against the ecological and social impacts of tourism activities that happened in mostly the south of our state. Over a period of 3-4 years, we felt the need to come up with a new model of tourism. An organization was formed named Kabini Community Tourism and Services, which is a private limited company, to promote community-based sustainable tourism as an alternative to the model which was existing. We mostly work with local communities across India in identifying, training, developing and operating community-based tourism products. We work with farmers, fisher folks, women self-help groups, indigenous community members and all, with farmers homestays as the base of our programs. We are one of the latest signatory of code, and it has really added value to our brand. As we conduct many academic programs for the students from different schools across the world, signing code reaffirms their confidence on us. We have received multiple trainings by the local code representatives, which really gave a lot of awareness to the community, as well as helped us to be prepared and prevent any possible child sexual exploitation that might happen across the supply chain. All our travel partners and the community members feel more confident to welcome the guests when post-COVID tourism resumes. Thank you.
All the guides are gathered here today to protect the children from the child abuse, because mostly it is a good effort from this association. With Aadhaar they are connected and they are trying their best to protect the child abuse, and it's our duty. We have gathered here. We all are gathered here, and we have promised to take any action or to help the child in any circumstances.
संस्था से जुड़े हुए हैं जो बच्चों के प्रोटेक्शन के लिए काम क्या करती है। हम जितने यहाँ पे बैठे हैं हम लोग टूरिस्ट गाइड हैं और भी टूरिज्म से जो इन्वॉल्वमेंट जिनका है, जो स्टेक होल्डर्स हैं, सब हम लोग पार्टिसिपेट कर रहे हैं। किसी की तरह से खजुराहो को हम लोग बच्चों की जो फिजिकल हरेसमेंट, सेक्सुअलिटी में उससे प्रोटेक्शन को लेकर आए और लोगों में अवेयरनेस क्रिएट करें, क्योंकि हमारा इंटरेक्शन तो होता है अलग अलग लोगों से। तो हम इसी मुहिम में लगे हुए हैं, वही संस्था के साथ हमें बेहतर काम करने का प्रयास कर रहे हैं। हम लोगों को उम्मीद है कि अपना काम हम अचीव कर पाएंगे।
So the private sector, whether it is formal, informal, organized, unorganized, is in a unique position to play a critical role in protecting children, working in collaboration with the civil society organizations and governmental bodies to develop as well as to implement the mechanism that address child protection concerns in India. It has been proved in various of our interventions across the globe, and we are hoping that in a post-COVID situation, when tourism restarts, these initiatives will be taken as a potential good practices and been integrated to the tourism operations to look at how we can make tourism safe and honorable for children as well. Now, what we would do is we will show you a video from Philippines. This has been presented by ECPAT Philippines, which speaks on the restarting in a more digitized post-COVID world. So we will be showing you that, and after that we will have one more video from Serbia, which also speaks about the same thing.
Travel restrictions due to the pandemic may have limited the movement of traveling sex offenders, but it certainly hasn't prevented them from victimizing children remotely. Reports of online sexual abuse and exploitation of children in the Philippines have tripled during the first few months of community lockdowns. The Department of Justice Office of the Cybercrime received over 870,000 Philippine-related cyber tips of online sexual abuse and exploitation of children from NECMEC cyber tip line in 2020. Perpetrators worldwide will waste no time as soon as travel and tourism resume and they are able to move again to victimize children in person. As millions of Filipinos have lost their homes, jobs, and livelihoods, not only because of the pandemic, but also due to consecutive natural disasters in 2020, children and their families have become extremely vulnerable to exploitation more than ever before. One of ECPAT Philippines project areas is the province of Bohol. Bohol is one of the most popular and tourist-friendly destinations in the Philippines. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, it attracted a total of 1.58 million visitors in 2019 from all over the world because of its stunning and diverse attraction. This island province with a population of 1.3 million is promoted almost exclusively through images of cute bug-eyed tarsier, majestic chocolate hills, sparkling white sand beaches, vibrant coral reefs, lush rainforest, coral stone-made old churches, and a lot more. Notably, the tourism industry is one of the main economic drivers of the province, which is only seconded by agriculture. Hence, numerous Boholanos suffered economically brought by the pandemic. Bohol has pre-existing vulnerabilities to human trafficking, identified as one of the popular trafficking routes, sending and receiving traffic victims. Several cases of sexual exploitation of children were reported to ECPAT and authorities since 2010 in the island province. Most of these cases were reported in the municipality of Panglao. The municipality of Panglao is situated in the island of Panglao. It is also known as the heart of the province tourism industry, where you can find more than 800 establishment accommodations, sparkling white sand beaches, fantastic diving and snorkeling sites, and the newly built international airport. Due to the pandemic, establishment operations were put on hold. Majority of the people's livelihoods of local communities have been heavily affected.
One of our measures to mitigate the impact of this pandemic as we already conducted our moral and recovery planning workshop. So we also have an economic recovery planning that is being conducted from members of different sectors in the society.
One of the labeled areas of the Panglao Tourism Roadmap is the village of Dulho. This is another area where most of the victims of sexual exploitation of children identified by ECPAT. In the olden days, most of the residents of this barrio rely on fishing and agricultural means for a living. People rely on informal economics such as fishing, vending, house helper, and workers of resorts and hotels. Dubbed as Dulho City, the village has many tourism destinations to offer like hotels and resorts and the newly established Modala Resort and Commercial Complex. Just across those big establishments is the area uncovered the sad reality of the village. Families are living in makeshift housing, considered informal settlers families, were directly affected by the pandemic.
Ang kahimtang nako sa among pamuyo lisod jud kaayo, labi na naay pandemya. Lisod ang pangitaon sa dagat, nihit ang swake, barato pa, usahay mistap buying ang among soke kay walay mamalit. Ang impact sa COVID-19 lisod jud kaayo. Imbis kay mukaon katulo sa usa ka adlaw, himuon na lagduha, dako jud ang kalainan sa among kahimtang karon kumpara sa miaging tuig.
Aiming to prevent the resurgence of sexual exploitation of children, a series of consultation has been conducted by ECPAT to the parents in Dulho to provide them a suited livelihood. This resulted to a community-managed livelihood tourism program on enhancing sea urchins production and pedal boat rental. With this, just right on time, as the tourism industry in Bohol is started opening back to visiting tourists. In its aim to strengthen policies and mechanism on child protection in preparation to the reopening of tourism, ECPAT Philippines, under the Department of Tourism's Tourism Works program, capacitated local tourism officers and tourism businesses nationwide to institutionalize children's protection in travel and tourism.
The Office of Industry Manpower Development, even with the pandemic, never ceased to train tourism stakeholders with 4 trainings conducted last 2020 and will continue training our tourism officers and tourism stakeholders, whether in the front office operations to prevent the predators in checking in with minors or through the crafting of local ordinances to protect women and children. We will also continue strengthening partnerships with other government agencies and instrumentalities as more and more tourism destinations are opening and gearing to welcome back tourists in their localities. We believe that we need to train more to continue this worthwhile advocacy and ensure the continuous protection of Filipino women and children from commercial sexual exploitation. Mabuhay po at maraming salamat.
Drawing from ECPAT's best practice in the province of Bohol, the series of webinars conducted under the Tourism Works in 2020 provided stakeholders with tools and strategies on pushing for an ordinance that mandates tourism businesses to adopt a child protection policy and train their workforce to respond to cases of child sexual exploitation that may happen in their premises. As a result, more tourism professionals became well-informed on the issue of child protection, and more cases were reported to authorities.
Thank you very much, ECPAT Philippines. I know that Janice was supposed to be here, but for some reason she is not here. I now welcome Zorana Parezanovic. She is a youth activist dedicated to the protection of victims of human trafficking and gender-based violence. She is a social worker by profession with extensive experience in social welfare politics. A significant part of her work is devoted to the empowerment of young girls and women who survive gender-based violence. She has been a member of NGO Atina's staff since 2015, actively involved in the movement against human trafficking in Serbia. Welcome, Zorana. She will be showing a video which speaks about the risk of child victims of human trafficking in Serbia.
Even though certain restrictions were in place during the previous year as measures taken due to COVID-19 pandemic, those didn't reflect on combating human trafficking and exploitation positively. Human trafficking has been on the rise for years, which only serves to show that traffickers are adapting to changes in society faster than those who should prevent them from committing it. This is also applicable for the situation of pandemic, which highlighted the position of victims of human trafficking and exploitation in Serbian society and exposed them to nothing else but to additional risks and challenges. Institutional response was only medical, while social protection system almost collapsed and couldn't provide support to children identified as victims of human trafficking or children in risk of exploitation. National Safe House was closed and all beneficiaries were referred to the Safe House of NGO Atina, which is not financially supported by the government, even though it is recognized and licensed by the state. Possibility of transiting and traveling abroad were restricted, but movement within the country was enabled. This fact didn't have an impact on decreasing violation of the children or increasing prevention of the exploitation. Analysis of the official statistics in Serbia shows that children are trafficked within the country and exploited not further than 100 kilometers from their homes. This trend was not changed even during the curfew in 2020, where 4 girls were found in the apartment above the local bar in rural area in Serbia and sexually exploited. The highest percentage of identified victims of human trafficking in Serbia are still children and youth, previously known to the social protection system. Moreover, another category of children at risk of human trafficking and exploitation in Serbia are children from migrant and refugee population. Unaccompanied and separated children make 1/3 of the total number of children from the population currently situated in Serbia. In this situation of global pandemic, they are additionally neglected and out of the view of the system, which makes them more vulnerable. In a situation of pandemic, a large part of global communication moved to the digital space and the risk of violence and exploitation increased. NGO Atina's team conducted interviews with 178 girls and women identified as victims of human trafficking. The purpose of the analysis is to prevent digital abuse from becoming a new normal and phenomena to which the public, due to its frequency, becomes indifferent under the slogan "viral is less real and therefore less important." The importance of the analysis lies in the fact that it was conducted on a representative sample. Cyber trafficking deserves to be found in the plans and strategic documents in the field of protection of human trafficking victims, especially children, in the context of the fight against human trafficking and transition to the online sphere of functioning and interaction, particularly fueled by the global COVID-19 pandemic. This type of abuse differs from other forms of human trafficking in that traffickers are abusing victims both in real and digital space, forcing them to perform sexual acts by themselves or with other people and keeping them in sexual slavery. Another form of such abuse is rape in front of cameras, which is often committed by the traffickers or another person who paid the trafficker for it. These forms of human trafficking can take place in real time, or it can be recorded and posted on the internet as a type of pornographic content. Similar cases have already been recorded in Serbia, in which scenes of sexual abuse of children are broadcasting through cyberdance live and with monetary compensation. Crises are always bringing difficulties and vulnerabilities, while available system of the support and its capacity decreases. As we are moving into the second year of a new normal, while the whole world struggles to cope with the lockdown and pressures on public and mental health increases, those most vulnerable are overlooked, while traffickers and crimes they're committed are advancing. We need to become more alert and take measures to protect and ensure the safeguarding of all children and youth, regardless of their situation. The conclusion is that the victims of trafficking during the pandemic became even more vulnerable, despite the mechanisms previously established to prevent further deterioration of their position. These mechanisms obviously did not work in the pandemic, and this is something to be worried about and work on to prevent in the future. This is particularly related to children victims of trafficking. The increased online communication and therefore the increased risk of trafficking on the internet, and particularly the risk of Child trafficking will most likely remain in place after the pandemic, given the simplicity and frequency of the online communication and the large number of communication platforms developed and already in use, not only by children, but also by general population. Finally, the movement restrictions during the pandemic caused more national perpetrators to be identified in human trafficking, but once the pandemic is over, it is to be expected that the number of the foreigners involved in the criminal activity will again be on the rise.
Thank you, Zorana. Thank you very much for this video. I would take this opportunity, since you're here, to ask you a question as well. And I would like to really know that this experience of what's happening in trafficking and the vulnerability of children being trafficked, what would be your one point that you would like to see when tourism restarts and tourism starts planning differently? What would be one or two of those points that you would really like the tourism planners and policymakers, decision makers to really remember?
One of the crucial messages that I should want to send to the ones who are working with children, supporting children, one of the most important things is that we listen to them and believe them and don't questioning in asking the situation that happened. This is what comes from our experience and interview that we did with like more than 200 children who just asked the professionals who are working with them, you should listen to us and you should believe us. So that is one of the crucial points that will make us really assist in the cases when the children are in risk or in the case of human trafficking or exploitation. Another thing is implementation of the existing policies, not only on the paper, but on the operational level. The clear and strict collaboration between all the sectors, because this is the thing that matters to all of us.
Thank you very much, Zorana. I think very important points that you have spoken about. That I think I really liked your last point when you said that it's a matter of all, and so everybody has to be together in this fight, and it cannot be done one by one or the other. And that's why I think it re-emphasizes the point where we started, that it needs a multi-sectoral, multi-dimensional platform, which is consisted of tourism players, CSOs, affected communities, youth, and all other practitioners who can actually form part of this particular struggle. Now I invite Juan Fernando Viveros García, Program Coordinator, ECPAT Mexico. He's the Director of Training and Educational Research Unit for Participation, EC, founding member and coordinator of programs of ECPAT Mexico chapter, co-author, among other publications, of Autonomy and Freedom, CSEC in its form of forced marriages, report commercial sexual exploitation of girls, boys, and adolescents in travel and tourism, Cancun, Mexico, and an initial look, protective environments for the prevention of commercial sexual exploitation of adolescents, high school students in tourist context in times of COVID-19. Welcome, Fernando. And he will be speaking on the child advocacy and youth empowerment. Floor is yours, Fernando. Welcome.
Muchas gracias. Hola a todos y a todas. Es un gusto poder participar en este seminario Transformando el Turismo, y es un reto platicar en unos minutos una experiencia de más de 2 años de formación, organización y participación de un grupo de adolescentes que trabajan en favor de sus derechos y en la prevención de la explotación sexual comercial de niñas, niños y adolescentes en contextos turísticos. Los Jaguares del Cambio es un grupo de adolescentes, ¿sí? Y el nombre que se pusieron de jaguar es en relación a este felino que vive fundamentalmente en México, en la península de Yucatán, donde se encuentra Cancún. Cancún, el principal lugar turístico en México. Desafortunadamente, con el crecimiento, en muchos casos irracional, del turismo, y en este momento la construcción de un tren que va a circular por toda la península de Yucatán, el jaguar está en peligro de extinción. Entonces, están disminuyendo los jaguares, está creciendo el turismo y está creciendo la explotación sexual comercial de niñas, niños y adolescentes. ¿Cómo realizamos nuestro trabajo? ¿Sí? A partir de la pandemia, mudamos todas nuestras actividades de formación y capacitación y participación con este grupo de jaguares a las plataformas digitales, ¿sí? Si pasamos el camino del jaguar o el balanza B, ¿sí? Como se le llama, estamos utilizando en este momento también ya rescatando, fortaleciendo el uso de las lenguas de los pueblos originarios, y el balanza B es una frase del pueblo maya, de la lengua maya que se habla fundamentalmente en esta región del país. Y esto es el camino del jaguar. Balam es jaguar, Sabé es camino, entonces el camino del jaguar. Esto tiene fundamentalmente 3 líneas de acción. La formación de los adolescentes, principalmente, por un lado, en el conocimiento de su realidad, cómo vive su comunidad, cómo se vive en la familia, cuáles son los problemas que tienen, cuáles son sus necesidades y sus propuestas de acción. Esta realidad se analiza a partir, en otro sentido, como segundo punto, a partir de sus derechos. ¿Sí? Retomamos la convención y los documentos internacionales y nacionales para analizar esas problemáticas y su contexto en relación con sus derechos. Y a partir de eso ellos pueden plantear alternativas de acción y alternativas a otra actividad que hemos desarrollado fundamentalmente a partir de la pandemia del COVID. Todo esto se hace en línea. Es un proyecto que le llamamos también en lengua maya el Kushishoja, que quiere decir la casa de lectura. Y ahí lo que estamos haciendo es fomentar, animar a los adolescentes al gusto por la lectura, y a partir de la lectura de textos literarios puedan analizar también su contexto comunitario, su contexto social, ¿sí? Por poner algunos ejemplos, hemos leído, por ejemplo, El Principito, hemos leído un par de textos de Malala para discutir la educación, y a Julio Verne, ¿sí? Esa es la parte que se lleva en formación con las y los adolescentes. Y después pasamos al maestro jaguar. A partir de su formación, ¿qué hacen los jaguares? Bueno, están participando en este momento en conferencias virtuales a las escuelas, ¿sí? Hemos realizado diversas conferencias virtuales en escuelas donde estos adolescentes, las y los jaguares, participan platicando su experiencia y haciendo un llamado a que las y los adolescentes se sumen a estos procesos de formación y de capacitación de sus derechos, y también para la prevención de la explotación sexual comercial de niñas y niños. También han participado en encuentros estatales con autoridades donde les preguntan cuáles son las acciones que llevan a cabo en favor de los derechos de los niños, demandas sobre acciones de América Latina en encuentros latinoamericanos. El último ya fue organizado y en donde participamos para discutir y analizar en este contexto de COVID y que la mayoría de las actividades se están haciendo en línea, qué plataformas, qué acciones pueden realizar para estar comunicados y empezar a socializar todas las formas y alternativas de acción para la defensa de sus derechos y para la prevención de la explotación sexual comercial. Otras actividades que han realizado, donde han participado activamente, en línea se ha realizado continuas formas de comunicación y también concursos, por ejemplo, a partir de las lecturas mismas de los libros, un concurso de frases que construyen a nivel digital, ¿sí? Todas esas actividades lo hemos realizado a nivel digital y algo importante es que las actividades, las capacitaciones, los procesos de formación que se realizan con ellas y ellos, utilizamos técnicas lúdico-pedagógicas, juegos que también se encuentran en las redes y señalamos las formas responsables, pertinentes con las que se puede utilizar la Internet y las aplicaciones de Internet para la protección de sus derechos, ¿sí? Entonces, esta es parte de las actividades que hemos realizado con ellos y las actividades que ellos realizan en favor de sus derechos y haciendo un llamado a que se sumen otros adolescentes. Entonces, esa es parte, digamos, dicho en pocas palabras, de la experiencia de los jaguares del cambio, ¿sí? Mucha más información se puede encontrar en las aplicaciones de ECPAT México, @ECPAT México, ahí pueden encontrar toda la información de las actividades que van realizando ellos, y yo espero que en los próximos seminarios ya no sea yo quien hable en estos seminarios, sino sean ellos quienes puedan participar, porque es importante algo, y quiero retomar algo que mencionaba Zorana hace un momento, escuchar a las niñas, niños y adolescentes es uno de los primeros pasos fundamentales para la protección de sus derechos, sus formas organizativas que ellos desarrollan a partir de sus necesidades. Muchas gracias.
Is that we also have to listen to the youth, listen to the children, and understand them, so that there is so that we can move forward. Yes, we will definitely keep it in mind that the next webinar will not be we speaking, it is they speaking, and we be the participants. We completely take this point of yours as well. As we are almost in the last few minutes of this webinar, I would like to ask one brief question to Michelle and Rob. I would like to ask you that what are the challenges that you see when we actually implement volunteerism policies? What do you think would be the main challenges, and how we could actually make, really work with those challenges? What could be the way out?
So I think there are myriad challenges, and Damian identified some of those in introducing the code. But very briefly, I think behavior change is very important. What we've noticed is that the changes of behavior and mentality and approach, gradually, by talking to people, by engaging stakeholders, gradually there is a shift in attitude which has taken place, I think, over the last few years. We have seen companies give up orphanage volunteering. We've seen companies make public statements about it. So I think it's behavior change. And I think it's a gradual process. I think we also need good evidence. We don't have enough data and evidence. The Dutch government has carried out a very detailed study of orphanage tourism, which was published in January this year. I'll put a link into the chat. And this, I think, is just the beginning of an evidence drive that we need to have. We need to find much better data and evidence. So I think that's another challenge.
I think also one of the other challenges that we face in addressing it is the viable alternatives to individuals. Sustainable alternatives that can really sort of drive and support that behavior change, because it's difficult to say to individuals, okay, orphanage tourism, let's end this, but we must have to do a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Rob. We have a question from Zorana and Fernando. The question is, the online space is a room of risk for children, but at the same time, a space for exchange and engagement. I would like to hear how this could be thought together, which kind of digital education is needed to support children to get empowered or to empower themselves. Zorana and Fernando.
Besides the one who are direct link to the children engaged in school, that is coming from the roots of education there, but also we have to do a lot because we know that not all the children are included within the school when we talk about primary education, but also the secondary. That is also the case in Serbia. The most vulnerable ones are actually the ones who are excluded from the educational system. We have to also be aware of them and try to let's say, bring some light to them and link them with the institutional support and the system they have to be a part of. So also, it's not only the things that we have to support them to understand their rights, but also to understand the risk that they can face within online sphere and within online media. But also we have to push the ones who are in charge to react in those situations, because we as an NGO in Serbia, we struggled a lot. And also one publication I would like to share with you, I will use the chat for that. We really struggle to explain to the professionals in Serbia, including within the justice system, within police officers, Center for Social Work, etc., that the things and the violence that is happening online is real. No matter if that is happening online, that's real. Those are also criminal acts. They have to react on that. That is a huge struggle that we are having now, and we are strongly advocating for them to understand and to establish the mechanism which can follow, monitor, and react in those situations, because a huge number of children is in huge risk in this situation when they're using the internet every single day for their education, for their free time activities, for everything. So everything's happening online. We have to take it really seriously.
Sí, claro. Bueno, nosotros cuando nos mudamos en línea empezamos a construir también medidas de protección. Sabemos que era el único medio para estar cercanos con las y los adolescentes, pero sabemos también que el crecimiento de la explotación sexual comercial se ha mudado muy fuertemente en línea. Entonces teníamos que tomar todas las precauciones. De hecho, en este momento estamos analizando con ellos y ellas cuáles son las medidas que se deben de tomar para la protección en línea. Sí, y cuando estamos trabajando con ellos, si existe algunas intervenciones, podemos cancelar las comunicaciones. En esto es importante porque nosotros utilizamos las plataformas de Internet, pero también cuando se realizan las conferencias con las escuelas, muchas de las escuelas tienen sus plataformas especiales, y también en ese sentido tomamos todas las medidas de precaución. Por ejemplo, cuando tenemos los talleres o en este momento, por ejemplo, también el proyecto de lectura, ¿sí? Lo que se hace es que quienes ingresan a la plataforma para estar interactuando con todos los juegos están plenamente identificados y solamente se le da entrada a estas niños, a estos adolescentes, a la plataforma. Los demás participan mediante chat en Facebook, ¿sí? Entonces no interactúan. Pero parte del proceso que estamos llevando es que a partir de analizar las plataformas que están utilizando ellos, las aplicaciones que están utilizando ellos, pensamos construir un protocolo de actuación específico para evitar que sean víctimas de delincuentes en línea. Es parte, digamos, del proceso que estamos llevando a cabo y queremos utilizar esta herramienta lo más que se pueda con todas las precauciones que se deben de tomar en cuenta.
Thank you very much, Fernando and Zorana, for your responses. I think we have already at the end of our time. I would like to take this opportunity to also say that we need to have our efforts to involve the tourism planners, operators, practitioners, communities, youth, children, and the CSOs in combating child exploitation in travel and tourism. It really needs to be stepped up, and we should include not only the multinational companies, but also the small and medium-sized businesses, as well as individuals, those who are involved in this tourism. I think it's very important to also to involve guest houses, online marketplaces, zero-star hotels and taxi drivers, And for that, we need collaborations among this information technology. We are talking about information technology quite a bit. And in the COVID time, we saw that the use of technology has really gone very, very high among the children and among all players. I think it's very important to look at how do we collaborate with the ICT companies, the law enforcement, travel agencies, to block the use of these new technologies for sexual exploitation of children, and also to disrupt the financial gains for offenders, as well as the criminal networks and the various intermediaries in collaboration with the financial industry. I think we need to also, as I think Zorana said about this trafficking issue, I think it's very, very important to look at the financial industry and how can we collaborate with them, and what kind of doors we can open up over there to block these various sites that actually promote as well, knowingly as well as unknowingly. With this, I thank you, each one of you, for actually joining this online seminar, sharing your experiences. I know some of you are up till late night. Some of you have actually woken up very early in the morning to be part of this, and also to the very, very lively participants, those who have been patient in listening to this entire 1.5 hour of our discussion.